Hey there, Vault Dwellers. Philip Mershon here, welcoming you back to the Mid-Century Vault. I want a zoot suit with a reed pleat, with a drape shape and a stuffed cuff to look sharp enough to see my Sunday gal. I want a reef sleeve with a right stripe and a dress vest in a glad plaid in the latest fad to see my Sunday gal. No, I wasn't speaking in tongues or channeling the spirit of a hepcat. Well, maybe the latter. These were the lyrics of a Gilbert and O'Brien song called Zoot Suit. It marked the heyday of the Zoot Suit, and it could be heard absolutely anywhere you went in the year 1942. In fact, in that year, it was recorded by the Kay Kaiser Orchestra, the Andrews Sisters, Paul Whiteman, Bob Crosby, Ray Herbick, and Harry Roy. But the best version, or my favorite at least, was the 1942 film short that featured the Ted Fiorito Orchestra with vocals by Paul White and Dorothy Dandridge. It's so great, I'm going to put a link to it in the description box below. And 42 was also the last year in which the Zoot Suit would enjoy fame without any political or racial stain, but more on that in a bit. Now, for those of you who might be thinking, what in the world is a Zoot Suit? Well, imagine this. A super high-waisted trouser that ballooned to over 40 inches at the knee and then cinched back down to a tight cuff at the ankle. A long coat, fingertip length, with wide lapels and exaggeratedly padded shoulders, generally made in bold, bright colors that sometimes clashed in stripes or shadow plaids. It was paired with a long watch chain that dangled down to the knees or below, and was often worn with a wide-brimmed hat and spectator shoes. It was loud, it was proud, and it was impossible to ignore. And you know, things like this don't spring up out of nowhere, and the exact origins are a bit fuzzy, but it's a fair guess that the Zoot Suit got its embryonic beginnings in the latter years of the Harlem Renaissance, which is to say the early 30s. And it can be tracked to the combination of a couple things. The first is the overall sense of the peacock stylish male in Harlem during that era, which in recent years has been termed black dandyism. Then you combine that with the growing popularity of swing music. See, back in the earlier part of the 20th century, fashion was often led by the latest dances. Hence, flappers adopted shorter skirts and dresses in order to do the wild dances like the Charleston, the black bottom, and the shimmy. So now, guys needed baggier, roomier suits to do the athletic moves required by the Lindy Hop and the Jitterbug. Soon, the Zoot Suit branched out and started gaining devotees that were Jewish kids, Italian-American kids on the East Coast, and Mexican-American, Japanese, and Filipino kids out west and on the West Coast. You catching on? Yeah, it was the marginalized communities who first discovered it, and it became a coded uniform of, we got our own thing. Finally, it got widely embedded in the consciousness of the general public in 1938 when bandleader, fashion icon, and hepcat deluxe Cab Calloway published his Hepster's Dictionary. The last two entries in which were the word zoot, an adjective meaning exaggerated, and zoot suit, a noun defined as the ultimate in clothes, the only totally and truly American civilian suit. Bam. Now, even the coolest, hippest white kids wanted in. And I suspect when that happened, the older status quo got scared that this self-expression stuff was getting a little beyond their ability to control. So, just like what happened with long hair and blue jeans in the 60s, afros in the 70s, and sagging pants in the 90s, a campaign was launched to tie the Zoot Suit hepsters to juvenile delinquency and un-Americanism with a heavy accent on the minority aspect. So, the inevitable clash happened in Los Angeles in 1943 between some very drunk military personnel and some pachucos, who were a hip counterculture group of Mexican-American kids known for their hipster lingo, their tattoos, and zoot suits. The tension had been agitated and egged on by the servicemen, the LAPD, and the press, especially the papers owned by the Hearst Syndicate. This became known as the Zoot Suit Riots, with nightly beatings, and some 5,000 white servicemen occupied the downtown and Mexican-American neighborhoods, stripping or cutting the clothes off the kids and beating them. And they also targeted African-American youth in Zoot Suits. This lasted for a week until finally, under civic pressure, the military personnel were barred from leaving their barracks. This dark chapter highlighted how fashion, especially when associated with marginalized groups, can become a target for prejudice and scapegoating. But it couldn't kill the Zoot Suit. The public, or at least Hollywood, has a very short memory, especially if there's a buck to be made. And just 7 months after the riots, MGM released the 13th in its series of Tom and Jerry cartoons called Zoot Cat. In it, Tom's girlfriend thinks he's corny, a square at the fair, a goon from Saskatoon. In other words, she says, "You don't send me." So Tom gets some inspiration and a pair of scissors and makes for the front porch hammock and fashions himself a zoot suit. "Well, now you're a mellow little fella," she purrs. And in the end, everything is all Reet Jackson. You can still see the influence of the Zoot Suit in Ricky Ricardo's suits on I Love Lucy in the 50s. And in 1978, the Center Theater Group opened a groundbreaking play at the Mark Taper Forum in Los Angeles called Zoot Suit, starring a young Edward James Olmos, based on the Zoot Suit riots. The following year, Olmos would open the play at the Winter Garden Theater, where it became the very first Chicano play on Broadway, and in 1981, the Golden Globe-nominated film version was made. And if we bring this story to today, the Zoot Suit dominated at this year's Met Gala, and they're still being worn by many members of the Mexican-American community for special events and celebrations. And you can get your own custom-made Zoot Suit at El Pachuco in Fullerton, California. A history like this, filled with such joy, community pride, and a helping heaping of historical sorrow, stirs the imagination. Do you have any family history or personal history with the Zoot Suit? Do you see its influence in modern fashion? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you'll like, subscribe, and share this video, and until our next adventure, dress up.